come that we think might do better. So that's the sneaky part that we have to be really aware of. There are lots of ways to approach triage protocols when you have a shortage. So for example, when you have more people than equipment, you could use a lottery. You could use a first come, first serve basis. There's lots of ways to do this. Some triage protocols have identified specific ages or disabilities and said people with those disabilities or people over a certain age will not get life-saving treatment. That's what I was talking about before. And that's also not just what has happened outside the US, but has happened in some places in the US. Another way to approach triage involves creating a score and using that score to either exclude people or to prioritize them, to rank which patient is going to get access to life-saving services. To do this, healthcare providers or quite possibly triage councils that might not even be in the hospital will look at many different criteria, and then they'll assign points for things that they think are going to make someone less likely to survive. And this could be in the short term, or it could be in the long term. Like saying, like, we think you're less likely to survive to the age of 80, so we're going to factor that in now. Usually the way these work is the more points you have, then the less likely you are to be given a resource if there's a shortage. You could even have a resource taken away in favor of a patient who has come along after with a lower score. The United States has laws against disability and age discrimination, but still a lot of the triage tools that have been developed for providers to use are very problematic because they are discriminating based on disability or age anyway, even though there are laws that say they shouldn't do that. They also have a dangerous loophole that makes them discriminatory against many communities of color, and I'll talk more about that in a second, and also against other marginalized groups. So many triage protocols allow providers to prioritize what's called life years. This means calculating how many years of life someone has left and giving preference to people with more years left. This results in giving younger people resources instead of older people, even though the US doesn't usually allow age discrimination against older people. Using life years disadvantages people who are members of groups who are expected to live less long. So it's not just age, but you could be a person, a member of a group who has a certain condition, and because of that condition, you're expected to live less long. That could be factored in. So just as an example, and this is an unusual example, but just as an example, if you had two 25-year-olds, one was fat and one was thin, you could theoretically say that the life expectancy of the fatter person was less, so they should be denied life-saving care. And this would be true even if one person was expected to live to 75 and the other 85. So in other words, when you're 25, 75 and 85 is a long way off. There's still a lot of life in between. Calculations of life years don't factor in things like risk-taking behaviors. So if that 25-year-old fat person always wears a seatbelt and drives very responsibly, and the 25-year-old thin person drives their motorcycle drunk every night really fast on windy roads, that thin person could still be allocated the care, not the fat person. So, and I'm not saying that's what's happening in California, but that's something to consider in the US and beyond when you think about how life years work. So now let's jump over and talk about comorbidities. Some triage protocols also encourage providers to penalize people who have certain comorbidities. Comorbidities are other conditions that medical providers have decided make people less likely to survive, either in the near term or in the long term. Sometimes these comorbidities could be supported by studies that say that there's a survival difference, but actually not necessarily, or that research might be very iffy. Some triage protocols look at timeframes like 5 years and 10 years, which is very problematic because it's really difficult to make an accurate prediction of how survivable a particular condition is 10 years down the road. They're also really subject to bias. And so sometimes you see medical providers, thinking about what's a good quality of life or who is sort of healthy enough to survive. People in the disability community often report that their quality of life is much better than people outside the disability community think that it would be. So commonly listed comorbidities that you'll see popping up in these different protocols from different states include everything from cancer to Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's, diabetes, high blood pressure, lots of different disabilities. Triage tools also often include penalties for using supportive equipment. So if you use home oxygen or CPAP or other breathing support, depending on what the policy is in that particular institution, there's a chance that that could be used against you in calculating your score. The CDC and anecdotal media reports have also talked about higher weight, BMI over 40, as a comorbidity for hospitalization related to COVID-19. And I'm not at all saying that this is accurate. That is very much up for debate. But the fact that it's being sort of and kind of like, accepted in that common way that people talk about fat is, it's really a concern because it means that people could face negative triage decision just because of their size. And we know that higher weight is not distributed evenly across race. So this is one of those loopholes for race-based discrimination. So the thing about discriminating based on comorbidities is that in addition to being a form of disability discrimination, it does become a proxy for discrimination based on race. This is because so many communities of color, so for example, Black, Indigenous, Latinx communities, Pacific Islanders, have higher rates of certain conditions or characteristics that are commonly listed as comorbidities. So I was just talking about weight, but things like high blood pressure, diabetes, that are associated with particular groups. In the US, these common comorbidities can also be overrepresented based on lower socioeconomic class. So even though I think that for some people it sort of sounds like science-y, it sounds scientific to use comorbidities to deny care, it's really important to understand what that means in practice when you're looking at the actual people who are being denied care. Like, what do those people actually look like? What groups do those people actually belong to? By discriminating based on these particular comorbidities, the medical system is actually rediscriminating based on based on race. And that's because many of the conditions are the result of generations of bias in medical care, environmental racism, economic disadvantage for communities of color. And we are seeing reports around the country that people of color, especially Black people, are disproportionately getting sicker and dying from COVID-19. So at the same time, certain people of color are more likely to be in essential worker jobs. They're more exposed to catching the virus. So it's it's like this triple whammy where you're at higher risk for contracting the disease because of all of these factors. You're at higher risk of doing poorly, like once you get it, and then you're higher risk of facing denial of treatment in a scarcity situation due to discriminatory protocols and bias. So this is why I say, like, we must fight for triage protocols that do not discriminate based on comorbidities. We cannot sit by and allow our government, our healthcare system, to just greenlight disability, race, size, or age discrimination in the pandemic. Or ever, obviously. So if I mean, if anything, governments and healthcare systems need to be taking extra steps right now to protect the most vulnerable people and the most disadvantaged people in our communities, not using the pandemic essentially as an opportunity to magnify the discrimination that people are already facing. And I cannot say this enough, but um, it is not fair to say that this fight should be fought only by the people who are impacted. Like, we all have to fight discriminatory triage protocols. By we, I mean everyone. I mean disability rights groups, elder law groups, anti-racist groups, individuals. You know, it's not fair, and we all have that responsibility to address this inequality. So with that, I will turn it over to Brandy to talk to us about what's going on with immunities.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, so I'm here today to talk about immunity. Immunity means even if you do something wrong, you will not be held responsible for it. Because this is a pandemic and people are making decisions under really difficult circumstances, many states have immunity laws or are putting out others about immunity. But this has to be done carefully because immunity makes it very hard to enforce laws and rights. California Governor Gavin Newsom may issue an executive order giving broad legal immunity to nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and other healthcare providers during COVID-19 pandemic. We need to watch very carefully. These types of group care facilities are very susceptible to deaths from COVID-19, and the residents often have no other options except for their facility. This immunity order could include immunity from criminal conduct, including reckless and dangerous conduct. Someone acts recklessly when that person knows that it is highly probable that his or her conduct will cause harm, and the person knowingly disregards this risk. Granting immunity to these group care facilities would make it easy for nursing homes to neglect patients. For example, for business reasons, a nursing home facility might not hire extra staff, even though they're accepting more patients, including COVID patients. This could result in some patients not getting the necessary care they need, possibly causing death, and no one would be held responsible for this if there is total immunity in place. Existing laws already give the healthcare industry legal protections during an emergency. Several statutes provide immunity. For example, California Emergency Service Act states in part that any licensed medical provider rendering services in a state of emergency shall have no liability for any injury sustained by any person of service, as long as the injury is not caused by a willful act. Also, California Business and Professionals Code states in part that no licensed medical provider who in good faith renders emergency care at the scene of an emergency or during a medical disaster shall be liable for any civil damages as a result of any act or omission in rendering the emergency care. This section shall not grant immunity from civil damages when the person is grossly negligent. So, gross negligence is a lack of any care or an extreme departure from what a reasonable, careful person would do in the same situation to prevent harm to oneself or others. The above statutes that I just talked about provide immunity. However, they both still provide safety against willful and negligent conduct. The current immunity in place still provides for someone to be accountable when harm is done due to carelessness. The immunity we have been hearing rumors the governor ordering possibly makes providers not accountable for any act, regardless of if it is an accident or carelessness. This is something we need to watch carefully and be ready to act on. Thank you. I think, Dawn, are there additional speakers?
Well, I think kind of given where we're at in time and that you all covered immunity pretty more thoroughly than we thought. Jessica and I were messaging back and forth, and we think we're going to save some of what she was going to share on immunity for our next steps conversation. But if there are any, I saw most of the questions in the chat so far are, yes, we'll be working on a transcript. I see a couple of folks already volunteering to help with the transcript, which is awesome. But if there are other questions that are coming up that are about the content or trying to understand what's happening here, this would be a good time to check in with Sandra and Brandy before we move on.
I have a question. I think this might be for Sandra. Do you know whether there's precedents of triage protocols that are actually not discriminatory in those problematic ways that could be the basis of developing ones for now?
Oh, you're mute, Sandra.
Well, I just said the answer, but I can't really repeat it. Just kidding. I'm really hoping that California will be that. That would be my hope. I think that it's right now, I haven't seen like one particular state that I think is, perfect. I think it's a matter of pulling the best of from multiple models to create one really good model. But I think it's a really important question, because once we have that one good protocol, then we can promote that in lots of places. And it's not just people in the US who are working on this, people in many countries are simultaneously working on this.
Yeah, and Jessica dropped in the chat that Center for Public Representation is a place to check out that have put out some examples of terrible and decent examples of what this could look like.
Excellent. Jessica, did you feel like in there was one that you would promote as like the one single model? Because I haven't seen that, if there is.
I'm pulling it up and trying to remember. I feel like they have, I don't think it's a model of state guidelines, but there's, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember what it's called, kind of guidelines pulled together by some advocates to be used as a model. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, it's a very good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to keep us rolling. And if there's other questions that arise, please use the chat box to raise them. And we'll try to use that to stay in conversation. We're going to hear from a couple of folks next who bring both community perspectives and about how folks are impacted by COVID-19 and the discrimination in medicine. And first up is Dr. Sinaida Fernandez-Poole, who is the Community Initiatives and Public Health Sciences Program Officer with California Breast Cancer Research Program, and also serves on the board with Community Campus Partnerships for Health. Sanaida, are you still on this call?
Here, can you hear me?
I see you now. I can hear you now.
Okay, good.
Just had a moment I didn't see you in
Are you
participate.
there? Yeah, gotcha.
Thanks. Do you want to share a bit with us?
Sure. I just really appreciate the chance to be here with you all today and to talk about my perspective as a scientist and as a human being, really. I'm a clinical psychologist, and in my career, I specialize in a specific type of research where community members actually create the research questions and set the research agenda and are involved in all stages of the research. And partly because of this, when I see what's happening, it's really depressing to me to see California failing to walk the walk of California for all, in my opinion. People who are going to be the most impacted by crisis care rationing, it appears that we're not even at the tables where guidelines are being created or being generated. And as we've been hearing today, the rationing is targeting people with comorbidities, people with fewer life years ahead of them. And in my, from my perspective, it's actually discriminating by definition against people who've already been facing systemic medical discrimination, who are daily living the experience of being surrounded and impacted by fat phobia, racism, and many other types of oppression. And I would guess even that lots of us on this call fall into one or more of those groups. I think what, I mentioned how depressing this is, but also it just seems that there's really a chance right now for our state to really serve as an example for others, to show what the world that comes after this could look like by rejecting discriminatory policies and by making sure that we're not putting into practice rules that would hurt people who are the most vulnerable at this time. I think the world that comes after this would be a lot brighter if we are engaging folks who are at risk of being most impacted by public policy, especially when we're crafting policy. But in addition to my work life and perspective, I also have my own personal experience. I'm non-binary and queer. I'm chronically ill. I'm fat and I'm brown. And I love people and am connected to people who would also be targeted by these discriminatory practices and guidelines, and even the executive order that folks have been discussing around immunity, which is incredibly frightening to me. And to date, there are people I know who have died, people I love who have lost their jobs. And personally, I'm just very afraid of getting sick with coronavirus because even though I know that I'm not disposable and I know that I deserve the same medical care as others, it's pretty clear to me that not everyone else agrees. And I know that if I show up at the hospital as sick as anyone else, if there is scarcity, then I won't make it out of the hospital under this crisis care rationing system. So I am just really appreciative of the chance to be here with folks who are like-minded. And I'm looking forward to the work that we can do together to have a huge impact on what happens in our state. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here with us, Sanaida. I really appreciate your presence and sharing both your professional perspective and the personal perspective, because we are we're all also just human in this crisis who and feel how much it has impacted our loved ones, and how much the fear of getting sick or losing our jobs just has impacted us so much. So I think
it really has.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna ask also, our second speaker here in this section is Ira X. Armstrong. And Ira is a frontline Blacktivist and social permaculture specialist who grew up in a culture of transformative justice before the field was named. And they've been teaching nonviolent direct action through the arts for over 30 years, and freedom-based economic self-determination and consent-based community care since 2008. They are a founder of Peace Out Loud, a neighborhood social permaculture project of building self-determined community through youth programs and adult coaching programs. Ira.
Thanks so much, Dawn. Thanks to everyone on the call. Thanks, Zenaida. It's great to see you. I'm just taking a moment to feel the gratitude, just to be here on this call and be breathing. Zenaida was talking about the fear of being denied care. I did have the experience of being denied care. I went to the emergency room in February. I had many of the signs that we know now are COVID, but at the time, some of them were not well known, not even by the doctors. And I am a fat, Black, trans, disabled, over 40 person. And they took my blood oxygen level. They did a CT scan because they thought that it might be because of my, I have another related condition. And when they took my blood ox level, it was 86 and then 90. And they sent me home with that. And for those of you who don't know, I didn't know that was critical. At 92 blood ox, you're eligible for being intubated. And I went home from the hospital and spent about a week feeling like I was gonna die. And coming to a place where I was thinking about what I had done so far and thinking, you know, maybe I've had a good run. And when I had that thought in my head, I thought, like, that's not me, right? Like, that is not the truth of my own experience. I have kids who are 12, twins, who are just about to turn 13, and I am gonna be here for them. And I'm gonna be here for my own life. And I have so much work, and I have a dog, and he's really adorable. And I like to look at him every day. And I reached out to some friends and comrades from the Disability Justice Culture Club. And, you know, I feel like, you know, I'm feeling a lot of gratitude for you, Zenaida, because the work that the DJCC is doing is a direct result of the work that you helped to start in the Anti-Police Terror Project. And in the what is now MH First, the mental health first responders that has happened from the Anti-Police Terror Project Sacramento, and the work that the People's Community Medics does on the streets, mostly in Oakland, but now in Seattle and in other places. And because I had those connections, I knew that this thing existed, right? And if I hadn't had those connections, I might not have known, and I might not be telling you this story right now. So they got me an oxygen concentrator, and I started oxygen, and that has been the difference between a quality of life and not. And you know, I had a call with People's Community Medics yesterday, and we're talking about not just sickness, right? We're talking about a recovery time that we don't know the end of, right? There are people who have lung damage in the way that I have, who are struggling with new kinds of breathing conditions they don't understand. I don't understand them. I don't have the experience to know what to do. And I want to be able to create responses that are not just about triage. I think that's really, really important, because if you can't get help when you know that you're sick, then you may not survive it, right? And then, but I'm also thinking about the long recovery time. Some people who may not have started out disabled might be permanently disabled from this illness. So I think we need to be thinking about how to care for folks long term, and that triage is not just about what's happening in the emergency room. It's also about who receives care, right? Who is going to be going to these places, to the nursing homes, and dying, and the people who are going to be given immunity for killing people like us. And that's not acceptable to me. It's not acceptable to my family. It's not acceptable to my children. And it's definitely not acceptable to my dog. I want to have a story that's different. And I think that we can, right? We, you know, Sanaida and I know that it is possible to do direct action and political advocacy that completely changes the world, right? And that is my intention, to be with you all in this moment, so that we can really shift and make sure that people's lives are impacted in a way that they get to have their lives. And you can have a really great quality of life. And I'm so grateful to all of the folks. Shout out to Crip Camp and DJCC and all the folks who have really taught us that disabled doesn't mean dead, right? Disabled means you can have a really, really great quality of life. And I expect that for all of us. Thanks.
Do you still want to sing?
Oh, sure. Do you all want to hear a song? Yeah. My gorgeous girlfriend, Aisha Linnea, is here. And let's hope I can get through it, right? She sings me this song, and I thought maybe we could share it with you all.
Great.
All right. Hi, everyone. There was a time I believed life was over for me. There was a time I believed my life was over. I feel strong today. Thanks to your help, I'll find my way. And I too will lend you a hand when you need one. Sometimes I get so down, I feel like this is the end. Like there's no way in hell I can get over this mountain. Sun has come out beyond the shadow of my doubt. I am walking on this earth stronger than ever. We're gonna make it a little less ableist the next chorus. There was a time I believed there'd be no love for me. There was a time I believed there'd get no loving. I feel love today. Thanks to your help, I'll find my way. And I too will lend you a hand when you need one.
You can sing along with your mute.
Sometimes I get so down, I feel like this is the end. Like there's no way in hell I can get over this mountain. The sun has come out beyond the shadow of my doubt. I am rolling on this earth stronger than ever.
There was a time I believed there'd be no money for me.
There was a time I believed there'd be no money. I feel rich today, thanks to your help, I'll find my way. And I too will lend you a hand when you need one. Sometimes I get so down, I feel like this is the end. Like there's no way in hell I can get over this mountain. Sun has come out beyond shadow of my doubt. I am rolling on this earth stronger than ever. There was a time I believed there'd be no peace for me. There was a time I believed there'd be no peace. I feel peace today, thanks to your help, I'll find my way. And I too will lend you a hand when you need one.
Sing with us.
Sometimes I get so down, I feel like this is the end. Like there's no way in hell I can get over this mountain. Sun has come out beyond the shadow of my doubt. I am rolling on this earth stronger than ever. I am rolling on this earth stronger than ever.
Last time.
I am rolling on this earth stronger than ever.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ira and Aisha, for leading us in some song. I know it's helpful for me after connecting in with some of the emotion of just grief and fear and anger and pain to just connect with that sense of power and possibility that is also here with us today. So thanks for leading us in that. I appreciate you all. So we have about 10 minutes left to think a little bit about what next steps can look like. We're lucky to have Jessica Lehman here with us, who is the Executive Director of Senior and Disability Action here in San Francisco. And Jessica's been a core part of pulling together the California Care Rationing Coalition, which has been a group of kind of pulling together both the policy and grassroots groups to be working together in partnership, so that we have both that legislative strategy and on the ground strategy working together. So we actually had a meeting today, so we have some clear next steps that we can offer to you all, and to be starting to think ahead about if there's ways that you'd like to be plugging in, we can be doing that. Jessica, do you want to kick us off with sharing, or do you want me to share a little more?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica. I am happy to, although I had to step away for a minute, and I came back and I realized you were talking about me. But I think it was just that I should kind of say some of the things that are happening and like what people can do.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So again, I'm Jessica. I use she and her. I'm with Senior and Disability Action. Really exciting to see all of you here. As Sandra and Brandy talked about, the two big issues on the state level are these triage guidelines and the nursing home immunity. And it's hard because with the triage guidelines, you know, they're working on them, and it's like they say, like the state people say they want to make them better, but they're not good yet. And so we want to kind of keep up some like gentle pressure on them. And then with the nursing home immunity, it sounds like the governor's office is like hearing the concerns, and that's part of why they haven't done an executive order yet, but it still could happen and we don't know when. So social media, of course, especially given now that we can't do things in person, is one of the best things we're doing. And so if you are connected to the organizers of this call or to SDA or to me, like try to follow some of the news articles that get put out and share those and just amplify as things happen using the NoBody is Disposable hashtag and don't ration our care. And then we are, we want to send, well, I'll let Dawn in a minute talk about the videos from last week's press conference on immunity that are coming out. That's a great thing to share on social media. People can watch that and understand the issue firsthand. And then we are asking people to call the governor's office and the California Department of Public Health or tweet at them to say, don't give nursing homes immunity, and about the guidelines to do the don't ration our care. We need guidelines that protect all of us. And then, so Senior and Disability Action is based in San Francisco, and so we're doing a town hall tomorrow morning at 11, which is why I'm so scattered right now. And so we are talking specifically about all of the problems in long-term care facilities, and nursing homes are starting to get some attention, but we also need to draw attention to all the other places that people live, psych facilities, group homes, boarding cares, assisted living, etc. And calling on the San Francisco Department of Public Health to test all staff and residents immediately and to start reporting infections, deaths, and testing, since that's just not being reported well and people don't even know what's going on. So, so I'd love for folks to join that tomorrow if possible. If you're in San Francisco, even better. If you're not, though, this is obviously a statewide issue. And we just decided today that we're going to do kind of a statewide version that'll be focused on all of these issues. And that's going to be on Thursday, May 28th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon Pacific time. So mark your calendar for that. And if you're able to join the town hall tomorrow, it's on Zoom, and you can register at this link right there. I think that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Jessica. And I just want to circle back that even if you're not in California, we're continuing to highlight California as a potential model state. And so we really appreciate your support in trying to pressure California to, as they want to be seen, to be a California for all. So it really feels like, yeah, again, San Francisco as a model city, California as a model state. So it's part of our strategy in the NoBody Is Disposable Coalition of really trying to target these places that then we can use these policies to be sharing them with other jurisdictions. So even if you're not here in California, you are still welcome and invited and encouraged to be part of this with us, because then we can bring this to your location as well. I put some things in the chat, but I'll just highlight them verbally as well. We have some great videos out from last week's press conference. One includes Ira's story, which you heard some of today. And so we are tweeting that at Governor Newsom so that he can help think about how to make California a real life, beloved community, a real California for all. So if you're up for doing that kind of tweeting, that would be great. A couple other invitations I'd love to make to folks. If you feel like you have your own story of not getting the treatment that you have needed, or avoiding treatment because of your fears of discrimination, we'd like to hear about it. Whether that's something you'd just like to share with us at the NoBody Is Disposable Coalition, or something that you'd consider sharing in wider circles with the media. We have a form that I've also posted in the chat, and we will circulate. And I think I'll send a final link around that has just a wider form, just if there's other ways that you'd like to get involved. You know how to be in touch. Most of you I know how to be in touch with. So we are close to time. We always fill up the time in many ways. So I really appreciate everyone's attention and energy and commitment in this work. We heard from you know, just kind of a wide range of both tender stories and just a really detailed legal work that has is really pushing forward some important policy that impacts folks not just in California, but really can have an impact nationally. So I just really appreciate everyone's work here, and thank you again to Rick for offering interpretation as well. So appreciated. And yeah, thank you all for your time this afternoon and evening, and we'll be in touch about other ways that you can be of support. And for that, I will close this call. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting, Dawn. Thank you so much, everyone.